This is an intelligent conversation. I'm Nolan Dalla with Matt Lessinger. This is our fifth discussion in 5 weeks. Each weekend, Matt and I sit down in a virtual, unrehearsed, unscripted discussion about what we think is an interesting topic, and we share ideas, we talk, and maybe more important, we listen. I think one thing we can all mostly agree on is that we could use a lot less shouting, more civility, and certainly more listening. So that's why we are here. Today we're discussing something that's not quite as serious at first glance, although it's a very serious topic if you are like Matt and I, and you've worked in the casino and gambling industry. And you certainly will think this is serious if gambling is a part of your activities, either be that either recreationally or professionally. The topic, of course, is gambling and casino games, and more specifically, the future of casino games. My co-host Matt Lessinger shares a diverse background in this area, so he's able to answer many of the questions from a perspective of a full-time gambler, a part-time semi-pro gambler, a recreational player, and academically speaking, and the author of books and columns on advantage play and positive expectation games. I think it's important to have a perspective of all angles when we talk about gambling and casino games, those perspectives being from a player, from management, and the academic perspective, and answering many of today's important questions about this. And Matt, in my estimation, is uniquely qualified in this manner, and hopefully myself too in some small ways. So this is why we're here. I'm in Las Vegas. Matt is in California. So we have two different perspectives in that way too. One from a big gambling market that's been widely considered the gambling mecca for many years or many decades, and then Matt is I don't want to say out in the provinces, but gambling is everywhere, and casino gambling and games are everywhere, particularly with not just land-based casinos, but the online or virtual world as well. So we're going to get into that as well. And so, with our intros out of the way, let's get straight to the point. Matt, you and I both know many people. We have lots of mutual friends who have devoted much of their adult lives and career vocations to working in casinos and a variety of different occupations. Now, let's say, Matt, that someone who is I'll just say a poker dealer, or they're a pit boss in a casino, and that's something you know something about.
Mhm.
Say they just come up to you for career advice right now. We're here in the midst of COVID, and we're going to try to put that off to the shelf because that's just kind of a pause button for many of us. We basically have paused our activities. Casinos are certainly on, I guess, a slowdown, or if not just an outright shutdown. But as we hit the reset button here, in the midst of what for thousands of workers is a shutdown, and so for some a layoff, with no promises of work or jobs ahead. What, Matt, do you tell them when they come up to you and say, uh, you know, is my job going to be there in the future? Is my job coming back? What's your answer, Matt?
Mm. That's a tough one. I guess for starters, it depends on the level we're talking about, because you were talking about, poker dealers, for example, and then I would say poker dealers on one end of the spectrum, and then casino management is on the other end. So let's start with poker dealers. I would say out of everybody, their jobs are probably the most in jeopardy at the moment, um, just from a combination of, I guess, a perfect storm of poker losing popularity combined with the coronavirus, combined with when we come back from the coronavirus, which is not going to be like a snap of the fingers and boom, everything is okay. It's going to be a very gradual process. And over the course of that process, we're already being limited in the number of people we can have at each table. Recently, um, we had started out in California. My casino is not reopened yet, but there are some other ones in San Jose and throughout California that have reopened. And in San Jose, for example, they were originally told they could have 7 players at a table, and then the powers that be came through the casino, decided that was not safe, that was not working, and now they're limited to 3 people per table. So overnight, poker disappeared because nobody wants to play three-handed. And even the other games, they survived, but it's a lot different feel than it was before. Looking at blackjack and baccarat, and especially games in California, such as Pai Gow Poker and Pai Gow Tiles, when very often you're playing against other players and not just the banker. And to have those games limited that way has really changed the dynamic. But again, getting back to poker dealers, so poker, at least in that area, the poker dealers were rehired, then they were laid off again. And now what's going to happen going forward? Well, maybe they'll phase back in and say, okay, now you can have 5 players, 6 players at a table. But poker dealers are probably going to be the most expendable out of everybody. And so if they came to me and they asked me, what should I do? I mean, I wouldn't lie to them. I'd say, you should probably keep your options open and see what else is out there. For somebody who all they've ever known is the casino industry, which includes myself almost entirely, since I was 23 years old, 22, 23. It's hard to think about a career outside of the casino industry. And pivoting from a poker dealer, you could certainly pivot to some other casino job possibly, but I don't know that I'd even recommend that. We'll probably get into that as well. So then on the flip side, the higher up you go on the chain until you get to like management level jobs, it's that much harder if you're, say, a shift manager to step into a comparable job in another industry, right? I'm not trying to, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm putting down poker dealers in any way. I'm just speaking to the amount of money that they stand to make, the amount of work that they stand to get going forward, and be realistic about it. And realistically, if they took the time now to do 2 or 3 months of training for a new job, that would probably behoove them. And they might even decide that job suits them better or leaves them in a better situation financially and with benefits. A lot of poker dealers don't get full-time work. They're not going to have the full-time benefits, things like that. So I would almost certainly recommend to them that if they have anything else that they're interested in now, while they have the time, would definitely be the time to look into it. And then again, getting up the food chain to pit bosses and shift managers is just that much harder to step into a comparable job. So you're probably going to roll the dice, no pun intended, and hope that things return to some semblance of normal and that your position will be there. And if it's not there, you have to face the possibility, like I am, that you might have to swallow your pride and take a job that pays a lot less than what you were accustomed to when things were normal.
Well, I've had the luxury, Matt, as you know, of traveling all around the world, really, to different casinos and in Europe and in South America, and certainly throughout the United States and North America. And I have really been, at the epicenter um, of the proliferation of casinos all around, the world. And this is quite shocking to me, actually, to go to cities and downtown areas of places and just see casinos everywhere, and
Mhm.
and that wasn't the case 20 years ago. It wasn't the case 15 years ago.
Right.
So I would say that I wonder what happens now that we're kind of in this shutdown mode, and I'm in Las Vegas, so I I think my perspective on this is very jaded, because I remember the very first week that the casinos here in this city, or in really the state of Nevada, were shut down. I remember taking my car and I just had to see for myself what it looked like. And I drove from essentially the Mandalay Bay, or where the airport is, and I drove all the way up to downtown. And I don't exaggerate here, but I saw probably a total of 100 people on the sidewalk over the course of that 8 or 10 mile drive. I mean, nobody was outside. Now, of course, this was right at the height of the COVID, and when everything was shut down, and it was the term is overused, but it was a ghost town. Now we're back to, I guess you would call it half normalcy. In other words, we're not back at full capacity. There's a lot of casinos that are under construction here. A couple of really big projects, by the way, are under construction right now and supposedly going to open soon. And I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty certainly. And had it not been for COVID, um, obviously this stuff would have gone probably full steam ahead. We would have had the sidewalks full of people. You would have had shows. You would have had 40 million people coming to Las Vegas every year. Well, that's now cut in half. And it may be, this may actually be, depending on the economy and a lot of other factors, um, that could be really in jeopardy. Now, I've talked about Las Vegas here in the last minute or so, and I really admit that I know almost nothing about the California situation, or I'm kind of limited to what I've read on the internet about some of the casinos that are up in other cities in the Northeast and Atlantic City and places like that. So we kind of, no one seems to be traveling anymore to different casino destinations. There's really no tourism associated with, hey, let's go to this casino and check it out and stay and enjoy the pool and go see the shows. There's none of that, man. That's all
Mm,
gone, at least
yeah.
for now. And there's no poker tournament circuit, which used to attract people like you and me. So what I wonder is, can you give us I say a report from the front lines about California? You mentioned the casino where you worked is shut down. I didn't know that, by the way. I didn't know they were actually dark. But give us a report about both firsthand and then what else you know about, California and elsewhere, if you care to.
Sure. I mean, before I get into that, I just want to say I remember watching your video from that first week of COVID, and I really appreciated your doing that because a lot of us, myself included, were just sheltering in place. We weren't leaving the house, and you took it upon yourself to drive up the strip and give, like you said, this one of a kind view of the strip, which you might never see again. It being that deserted, right? I mean, when is that ever going to happen
Yeah, well,
again?
let's
So
hope
that
not.
was,
And of course, I could
yeah,
do social distancing in the front seat of my car, and that was one of the advantages of just driving down the strip. But yeah, you're right.
right,
It was really strange to see. I mean, not only not no people, but the doors closed or bolted,
right.
locked and bolted, and then the signs in many cases also dark. But again, and I'm assuming that was kind of the way it was in California. But you can correct me if you want.
It was, and yeah, it just had this doomsday feel to it, where it's like we didn't know at that time how well we would come out of this, if at all. We still haven't come out of it completely. So in terms of California, which I'm not going to waste too much time on that because I remember when I lived in Las Vegas thinking it's all about Las Vegas. California, other places, yeah, good for them, but we care more about the gambling meccas. But just real quick about California, um, they'll survive. I mean, just like any other localized casino environment, where people are not going for the tourism aspect, right? They're going more for the hardcore gambling aspect. The places in California don't rely on tourism. They rely on the everyday players that come in, either the retirees or the really hardcore gamblers. Um, and it's already clear that they're going to come back. I mean, the retirees, if they were well off enough to begin with before COVID that they could gamble every day, COVID probably didn't hurt them that much if they're retired, right? I mean, it's not like their retirement accounts took a hit. They probably did okay while they've been sitting at home. So the retirees are going to come back out. And then the hardcore gamblers, maybe it's a question of whether they need income coming in and whatnot. Once their income starts coming back in, they'll be back too. So places like California and like you described, the places all over the country where there's more localized casinos in Arizona and New Mexico and Louisiana and Mississippi, and the list goes on, right? All over the Midwest. Um, the places that rely on the everyday gamblers, I think they'll do fine. I'm more worried about Las Vegas and places like Macau, even though I'm not very familiar with Macau, seems like a similar tourist destination where I don't know that they can recover. And that's why I was going to ask your perspective, throw it back to you. Um, how do you see, I mean, you said what it would be like if things were normal, 40 million tourists and shows and restaurants and everything. Do we ever get back to that?
Yeah.
What do you see as the future?
Well, ever is a long time, that so it's hard to project something like that. But
Mhm.
maybe that's not a far-fetched question, really. And one of the things that we're going to focus on in this show is the discussion, I should say, is not just how are we changing because of this I call a reset button, but
Mhm.
not only are we changing our habits, but also just this general trend away from gambling, and maybe certainly certainly going more virtual or online versus say live or brick and mortar. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here, but
Mhm.
specifically with regard to Las Vegas, which is what you asked, I think that um, one thing that I don't believe a lot of people recognize, especially if you're just here on weekends or you only come say once or twice a year, it is so important, the convention market, the
Mhm.
market that comes for shows. And there are I don't work for the Las Vegas convention and tourism bureau. It sounds like I do, but their
Yeah.
figures are enormous. Their budget's enormous. They built a massive convention center and expanding all that, and that's such a huge part of Las Vegas's economy, that when there are 70,000, I'm not making this up, uh, pizza makers. They'll have the world's pizza makers convention here, every year. They have the world's porn convention here every year. They
Mhm.
have computer biggest computer show here every year, biggest auto show, one of the biggest auto shows, on and on and on and on. Every single week, there are dozens of conventions in Las Vegas. They're all gone.
Right.
They're gone.
Right.
And so when you take those people out of the economy, out of the Las Vegas economy, and their expense accounts, by the way, these aren't just tourists like spending $120 for the rooms. These are people on expense accounts, in many cases very well off. A lot of executives spending $350 a night at the hotels and filling up the very expensive restaurants on the strip, and bringing their spouses and sometimes kids and turn it into a shopping. And I mean the associated uh, economic impact of these conventions is just it cannot be calculated, really. So again, people think like you and I, oh, kind of semi-professional gamblers, and we're focusing on advantage play, and that's really not Las Vegas anymore. It's tourists that come on the weekends from California and in some cases other places, and that convention market. And so since that's completely gone, uh, it's really hard to forecast how this city is going to turn around. And so, I think last it was about a week or two ago, MGM laid off thousands of people,
Mhm.
and Caesars laid off thousands of people. By the way, while giving their executives big bonuses, which
Right.
just absolutely talk about bad optics. But who's surprised? With the way casino corporations are run. I mean, bankrupt. I could go on and on about that. But
Mhm.
I will say that the people that are going to suffer most are us, the people that live in Las Vegas. That when we look down on the strip, when I say look down, I live in Summerlin, so I actually look down on the strip. It's
Mhm.
a thought we're 1,000 feet higher in elevation, so I'm up by the mountains, and I look down every single night, and I see the glow of all the lights, and they don't shine as brightly as they did a year ago. And I think those lights are going to start dimming a little more, and because there are obviously fears about the economy, not just related to COVID, but just there are a lot of fears. And so I think when people are fearful, they're not going to go again and jump on a plane and go spend several $1,000s living it up in Las Vegas. There will always be some of those people that do, by the way. But
Mhm.
if they're not with the numbers that they were in the past, then Las Vegas is not Las Vegas. And so I think that's the danger. And it's an interesting point that you made that I really had not considered, that Las Vegas and Macau, as you mentioned, maybe Atlantic City and a few what I call big markets, magnet markets or destination markets, those are going to suffer much worse than I think, like you mentioned, the local casinos. And when I was traveling around, and I would see this is really just so bizarre to me that if you go to downtown Baltimore, there's a casino. Downtown
Right.
Cleveland, there's a casino.
Right.
Or outside of Chicago, there's a casino. Cincinnati. I can go to all these cities that were, they never had casinos until 15 years or so ago. And so what's going to happen with those casinos? And I'm assuming they'll do okay. I think they'll probably survive because they again rely on a lot of locals. I think that was kind of your point there. Is there's just a difference in the kind of um, consumer that visits those casinos versus the ones in Las Vegas. Is that kind of what you were saying before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, other than Las Vegas and Macau, I really, and possibly maybe like Monaco or Monte Carlo rather,
Yeah.
I can't really think of any other place in the world that is a destination for their casinos. Can you think of any?
Well, I guess the answer is no. Where
So,
people just go purely to what's called a casino resort destination. You're
or that's
absolutely
the
right.
main attraction,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's even though Las Vegas has diversified, that's always been its main attraction. That's Macau's main attraction, possibly Monte Carlo as well. But other than that, none of the places you mentioned, none of the places in California, even though you have these enormous card rooms like the Commerce and the Bicycle Casino in Southern California, you're not really attracting out of towners. If people happen to be in the Los Angeles area for other reasons, then they might go there. But other than maybe for a major poker tournament, which is not happening these days, nobody's really coming from out of town to go to these places. So yeah, I mean, I see a much worse forecast for Las Vegas, and it's maybe, I'm giving you this perspective from a distance. But I mean, the new casinos that you talked about that were getting ready to be built, I mean, those were iffy propositions under normal
yeah.
circumstances. Like
Right.
we didn't know if the market can really hold that many different casino resorts. And remember, we had a conversation once before about how now one of the main attractions is the nightclub, where if you're going to build a new $400 million resort, you better have a nightclub that brings in all the 20 somethings. Because if you don't have that, you have no traction whatsoever. And that was a great point about the conventions. I mean, that is probably the equivalent, but for a somewhat older crowd, maybe 30s, 40s, and so on. So the combination of having no nightclubs right now and no conventions is really deadly to Las Vegas's future, in my opinion. I mean, I cannot see a future where every one of the strip casinos survives. I don't think that's possible.
Hmm.
The locals casinos, maybe, for the same reasons that local casinos in other markets can survive. If there's a casino in Summerlin, the Rampart or the Red Rock or things like that, right? Am I naming correct ones in
Yes,
Summerlin?
yes, you
Okay,
are.
excellent. Then those will probably survive just on the strength of the local market. But looking up and down the strip, and you think to yourself, people that are flying in from out of town are not filling those anyway. I mean, and even the ones that are on low on the popularity scale, like the Tropicana and the Excalibur and the downtown casinos, are getting filled on the basis of good deals, or they were, right? Like they would offer the cheapest prices in town. And now it's like not even the cheap prices are going to get people into town. So are they going to make it? I think places like that are probably the first ones to go. And then what's going to happen? I mean, then I think realistically, you have to look for other uses for that space. And I don't have a crystal ball as to what that might be. But I think whatever square footage has been dedicated on the strip purely to gambling and gambling related activities or resort related, tourist related activities, probably needs to be rethought. And
Wow.
maybe,
Yeah.
some of those casinos will become a mall or something. I mean, I can't even, again, I don't really have a finger on the pulse of what there would be a good market for there, but um, something other than a casino. I mean, I don't have the numbers for how many casinos there are between from Mandalay Bay to the downtown area. But if there's 40 of them, at least, maybe 50, how many could survive? Half, maybe. I don't know. So I always feel like I'm the pessimistic one in our conversations, right? I feel like I come out here and I'm just like doom and gloom, and we're not going to survive, and everybody needs a new job, and whatever. But I mean, again, the main reason I feel that way is because we didn't. Most people thought Las Vegas couldn't support the casinos it has already, and so now this is just the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think some of the lower end ones are going to bite the dust. They're going to reinvent themselves, and that'll probably be a process over the next decade. It would be my guess.
Yeah, if let's don't play back any of the old tapes of our predictions on the casino industry, because I'm going to look pretty foolish myself. I've never understood the fascination that so many visitors have with shopping, and I
Mhm.
don't understand. Again, Las Vegas has turned into a gigantic shopping mall, and I mean, there's a Ross on the strip. It's like, seriously, you came from Des Moines, Iowa, you flew 2,000 miles, and you want to go shop at the Ross, really? And but you think I'm joking? They have a big Ross, and it has the neon sign, of course, and it can't just be a regular Ross sign. So same thing with the McDonald's and all that stuff. So, well, let's talk about specific games now, and I will give you a little bit of I guess I'll call this a lecture
Mhm.
about how much I despise the word gaming, because what happened is the casino industry, the gambling industry, tried to reinvent it itself, at least from a public relations standpoint, about 25, 30 years ago. And this was done by the American Gaming Association, just the AGA, which drives me crazy.
Mhm.
That they wouldn't, if you have to change the name of what you do and what you represent to something that's not really what it is, it tells me that you're ashamed of it.
It
Like, just
sounds like
say we're the
rap to hip
American
hop. Yeah,
Gambling Association, we're the American Casino Association. Don't give
right.
me gaming. That's such a cop out, a wimp thing. Talk
I agree.
about gutless. So I've
Mhm.
never used in my writings, in my pronouncements, in any speeches I've given, the word gaming, because
Interesting.
gaming
Okay.
gaming is gamers. That's kids
Mhm.
largely with video games. Those are gamers. Gamers are not dice shooters, okay? They're not poker players. They're not sports bettors. Those are not gamers. It's not gaming.
But
So
that's a dying breed. To
that's
to
my
to play devil's advocate,
uh,
the gamers outnumber the gamblers now. It's not
That's
even
true.
close.
You got a
So
point there. You
yeah,
definitely, and that's increasingly the case, which is a perfect segue into what I was going to ask you, Matt. So thank you very much. That was not a setup. So here
no.
now we're going to discuss. That was my little bit of a rant. I have to do at least one of those every show. And so casino games have certainly changed over the years, and until now, they've had mixed results, changing with the times. But now all that's up in the air. And when the first casino boom happened in the United States in our lifetimes, if we remember back to the 1960s, the 70s, and the 80s, what was the dominant games of chance or casino games back then? They were called pit games, and they dominated the casino landscape. And of course, I'm talking about blackjack, craps, roulette, and other table games. Then in the 90s, up really much till today, electronic games became increasingly larger as a market share, and namely slot machines and video poker. And then the automation and the microchips have made some of these games just absolutely like playing a computer. So it's not like the old spinning reels like it was years ago. So of course it's a very electronic gaming floor now when you go into a casino. That's the big difference, say 2020 versus say 1970. So we've seen the poker boom come and go. That was 10 years ago or so, and up until COVID hit, it looked like sports gambling might be the next big boom in as a gambling attraction, and that still might be the case. By the way, it seems like we're kind of on a razor edge there about what happens. So I'm throwing a lot at you here when I ask what I'm about to ask you. But looking at the what I call the up, down, or arrows that are, say, going back and forth. Where do you think each of these games is headed? In other words, I'd like you to, Matt Lessinger, put on your get your crystal ball out, and I'd like you to predict. Let's just presume COVID's not on the a factor
Mhm.
right now. Let's
Okay.
suppose that that's over with, and we're all back to what's called normal, if that's even a possibility to envision. But let's presume COVID is not on a part of this conversation, and we're talking about the up or down arrow and which direction it's headed for each of these games. I'm actually going to read each game to you, and I'd like you to give me just a little bit of a description as to why, and then I'll offer my own perspective. Let's start with blackjack, which was really the 1960s. Of course, Thorpe's, beating the dealer and all that. It created a blackjack boom about 60 years ago, and there were blackjack tables everywhere, and certainly early on, and then they've kind of faded out as a game, but it's still certainly there. What's the future of blackjack? Up or down, or what are your thoughts, Matt?
Well, can I divide it into two separate? Because you mentioned electronics, right? So it's question is, will people continue to play it electronically? Because I think in the long run, just about all pit games are on the way out, right? And then it's just a question of will people continue to play it in some other form? So if I'm looking at blackjack as a pit game, I'm going to just classify it with every other pit game and say it's trending downward. And then the question is blackjack as just a game. Are people going to continue to play it? I think it's ingrained enough in our culture that people will continue to play it. I think it's trending downward, but I don't think it'll disappear entirely. It's one of the games that, is approved to be played in places like, um, California and a lot of other casinos that cater to locals. For example, they can't play craps or roulette, but they can play blackjack. And getting into the reasons for that is out of the scope of this conversation, but just basically the way that, the laws are written across states for gambling or gaming, sorry, or whatever the hell they call the laws now. But so blackjack is one of the games that usually makes the cut, and so it continues to be played around the country. So it'll always be there. But to think that any pit game could ever trend upward again is unrealistic, and I don't think, and that includes blackjack as well.
All right, I'll give you a sidebar conversation, a very quick one on this. Um, Casinos have largely tried to up their advantage by, let's say, going to 6-5. If you know what
Mhm.
people that play blackjack knows what that means. Basically, they're basically screwing the player with worse odds. That's just the simple way of putting it. This trend is basically just trying to squeeze more profit from each customer. That's going to turn off serious players. Is that a wise strategy, or just hey, just bring in the suckers and let's fleece them for as much as we get? That's kind of the attitude. But the question I have is turning the screws to advantage players, or certainly people that know what they're doing and giving them poor odds. Is that going to backfire as far as hurting blackjack?
The short answer is no. I mean, looking at again, and I appreciated your introduction, and then you said that I've been on both sides of the table and whatnot. So
Yeah.
I also belong to some forums that discuss advantage play in video poker, advantage play in blackjack, etc. And they're always complaining. They're always like, "Oh, they changed this rule. I can't play here anymore." And what are they doing? They're just shooting themselves in the foot. And I'm thinking to myself, "No, they're not. They don't want you there. Why would they want you there? You're like somebody that's trying to squeeze every nickel out of the casino." And I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong, but now if I'm a casino manager, I don't want you around. Go somewhere else. Go if you say another place has better odds on blackjack, good. Go count cards there. I don't need you. Right. I mean, same with video poker. Like I enjoy playing video poker and I enjoy going to places where you can eke out a small advantage. But the casino management side of me wonders why those machines are there at all. Like, you don't have to market to people that are trying to make a small profit off of you. Like, maybe in the grand meta scheme of things, you get some money out of them because they eat in your restaurants and possibly stay in your rooms and things like that, but they're not worth your time and effort. Like, and you don't have to be a sucker either. I mean, you don't have to be a whale or a sucker. Like, you just want, as a casino management, you are happy with the middle ground. Like, you just want the people, like you described, the convention people that are there to blow, $300 or $400 in a night. Like that's more than enough to get by. If everybody would blow $300 or $400 in a night, then
Now,
you're
now
healthy.
I understand that. I understand the point you're making, but again, let's keep this real short, if I may,
Sure.
only because I have a lot of games. But you just, you've incited me to ask another question. So, what is better for the house? And again, you see it from the house side. Is it better to have a blackjack table empty, or a couple of advantage players, or I should say, at least players that know what they're doing sitting down? Empty
Uh,
versus two good players. What do you say?
I don't see the point in having good players. I
Okay,
think
all right.
if that's all that you have, then it's like you have nothing. So,
Okay, well,
yeah.
all right. Well, the fair answer and an honest answer. Let's move down to craps. What's the future of craps? Is the arrow up or down? Of course, craps was popularized in American culture really in World War II. A lot of soldiers overseas shot craps, and then they bring back these habits of war with them. And then if you look at the layout of casino floors, say in the 1950s and 60s, you saw, well, you know what you saw? You saw more craps tables, and you heard the craps tables more than anything, because those were the funnest and most boisterous places. And anyone who's ever stood at a craps table, especially during a hot roll, knows exactly what I'm talking about. The question is what's the future of craps? Because it's very labor intensive, takes a lot of
Right.
space up, and I'm not sure there's so much of a virtual, in other words, online future for craps, because craps is one of those games that it's almost it's a magnet for people and excitement and cheering, and kind of a camaraderie, us against the world, and that kind of a thing. I'd like to hear your thoughts on craps. I'm not sure where I'd put the arrow on that one.
The arrow's definitely down. It's just a question of how much. I mean,
Uh-huh.
what you just described, I absolutely agree with. That it does. It brings an air of excitement to the gaming floor that the other games really don't. But the problem is that you can't quantify that, right? So now, the overarching argument you're going to hear from me, no matter what game you mention, is that now you've got, bean counters running the casinos, and they want to see the bottom line, right? So if you come to them and say craps generates excitement, they're not going to give a shit, right? They want to know how much money the table's taking in. And the bottom line is that craps is not worth it. I mean, it's always going to have a place, because I think gamblers have sort of a pride in knowing craps and teaching craps to other people. Like, I know I did. And here's something people might not have known. I dealt craps for 2 years and I loved it. Like, maybe I'm weird, but like, I like dealing. When I did it, I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed dealing craps, and I enjoyed the mathematics of it,
Wow.
because, when you got high limit players that they almost want to test you as a dealer. They want to
Wow.
see, oh, do you know what this will pay and what that'll pay? It's like when you satisfy that, when they realize that you know what you're doing, it becomes, like you said, kind of a camaraderie. So I always enjoyed that. Now here's the problem. Craps is the hardest game to learn as a dealer, out of the pit games that are in Las Vegas. It requires 4 dealers at a time, plus a box man, right, or box woman, right? Because you've got the stick man or woman, the 2 base dealers, and then the one that gives the breaks, and then the box person sits in the middle. So you've got 5 dedicated employees to this one table, and these are high skilled employees, and they're going to make the least out of everybody because they have to split their tips that many more ways. So that's one of the reasons that it became the norm for dealers to split their tips over a given shift with everybody else, because I could be a low skilled blackjack dealer, but it's just me, and I've got a full table, and I might take in $1,000 in tips in a night. And then at a full craps table, right, I might take in $1,000 in tips in a night if it's a good night, and then got to split it 5 ways. So that's not fair. And for that reason, I think just more and more casino executives are going to look at the bottom line and decide craps isn't worth it, for the manpower, for the space, for whatever. Will there be a demand for it? Again, from the hardcore gambler perspective, I think so. From the old timers that enjoy playing it, and then they enjoy passing that knowledge along to the next generation, and the 20 and 30 somethings, take some pride in telling their friends that they know how to play craps and showing it to their friends, and like, this is a real gambling game here. But that's only going to go so far in terms of, our casinos that used to have a pit of 10 or 12 craps tables. That doesn't exist anymore. I mean, now you might have a pit of 4 or 6 craps tables, and maybe that'll be reduced to 2 craps tables, and it's going to continually contract until one day it's extinct. But I don't know how long that'll take.
Well, I'll just follow up with one thing you said, which unfortunately I must say that you're absolutely correct. However, that shows I think one of the reasons that we're seeing a demise in the market share of casino games as a percentage of casino resort revenues. It used to be, 60, 70% of the drop or the profits in Las Vegas or in the casino industry were from the pit. And now that number's down to around 25% industry wide. And
Mhm.
that's because, again, food and beverage, shows, conventions, hotels, all those departments now are in many cases more profitable, or at least as profitable. So, but I wanted to throw one thing back at you that I think is, it absolutely shows one of the huge problems with regard to what I call the business bean counter versus the person who just doesn't understand the gambler or the gambling mentality. You mentioned that what do they care that a bunch of craps players uh, leave with smiles on their faces? Well, this should be self-evident to anyone who has ever worked in with the public or understands consumer habits and so forth. And that's that when you have happy gamblers, even if they lost, by the way, even if they lost money, if they're leaving the door and saying, man, I really had a great time. I can't wait to come back next time or next week. That's what you want them to say, because then you've got them. And so, this whole idea of just fleece them, what's the drop look like? And, all that's all that matters. Well, there's the whole problem right there, that when you have people that feel like they got screwed, that they didn't have a good time, they're not coming back, or they're going to certainly spend less money next time. So there's the problem. You've got a bunch of people that run these places, and I've worked in with them to a large extent. They've never held a pair of dice in their hands ever. They've never held played
Mhm.
a hand of poker. They've never made a sports bet. They graduated with an MBA, or they went to some school and got a business degree, and they think, or accounting, and they think that's the world. Hello, look at your numbers now. So I mean, this to me is, again, there's my second rant. See, this is just to me so self-evident. What's wrong with the whole industry is that you've got to make people feel like they had a great time, and one way to do that is to, hey, let them win a little bit sometimes.
Well, if I may jump in,
Sure.
I had a quick question before I go on. When you mentioned 25% revenue, does that include table games and slots combined, or was that just table games?
My figures. By the way, it's funny. I knew I'd get asked something on these figures because let me give you a little bit of a. I don't want
Mhm.
it to be too long, but I've attended this week is usually what's called the G2E convention. It's the largest
Mhm.
gambling convention in the world here in Las Vegas. It's always in mid-October. This year it's been canceled, of course, for obvious reasons. But I think I've attended. I think it's been 15 years. I've attended 10 of them, and I spoke at 3 of them. So I'm pretty familiar with what's called G2E and these gambling conferences, and the conferences always have the greatest thing about going to them is that they have classes or seminars, and you go and you listen to experts in these fields talk about what is the drop with slots right now. Is it up or down? What are millennials doing? What are the new habits regarding marketing and social media? I mean, I could get into hundreds of topics related to casinos and gambling. By the way, if you think that if you think about the casino business, but you've not been to the G2E and done some of these seminars, you know
Mhm.
very little, because I found out how little I know when I went to a lot of these seminars. And so, getting to your question, one of the things that I remember seeing on one of these charts, maybe it was a pie chart or it was a flow chart, but it was like, again, in 1990, it was 65% of the revenues from casino resorts in Nevada were related to tables, and that's the sports book and Keno and everything else, but related to gambling. And now that number's about 25%. And I believe now, again, somebody's going to call me out and say, "Hey, you were wrong," and perhaps I am, but I believe that's just all gambling related because
Okay.
the conventions make so much money. The restaurants, the hotels, all of that. So, I mean, parking, they were charging for parking. That was a source of revenue. I mean, everything
Right.
is now a squeeze. So,
Yeah.
that's why you're seeing it's not necessarily that gambling is um, down. Like it's not like they're making less money gambling, but the other departments or sectors within the corporate world are making more money. So
Mhm.
like the hotel part used to probably be break even, or maybe they make a little money. Well, now they're charging $350 a night at some of these properties. So now their profits are off the chart, or at least they were. And
Yeah.
same thing with food and beverage, and so again, as a percentage overall, I don't mean to imply that gambling is down. I just mean to imply that the other sectors within corporate gambling are significantly up. And when I say up, that means over the last pretty much since casino culture became corporatized, when corporations came and took over. Whole new ball game, whole new balance sheet of accounting, whole new set of priorities. Bonus is now going to, based on different performance indicators. I mean, everything shifted quantumly, around the 80s and 90s, and now we're seeing again a generation later the ramifications of this change in culture and in management. And I think again, obviously the old school guys like me don't like it, but I think it's just very clear that this is um, the reason we're doing this show is we're asking: is this model the new model of gambling and casino resorts? Is this sustainable? And they certainly probably can't go back to the way things were. But if not, so what direction should they go? And that's kind of what we're discussing here. And by the way, there's no easy answer here. Whenever I'm asking the questions, I don't have the answers, and it appears you have some of them, Matt. So that's why we're on this trick. I'm going to roll into my next one if I can, because we've got a few more games to cover here. Roulette we were talking about blackjack and craps,
Mhm.
and you mentioned a downward trajectory there. I'm going to challenge you on this one before you immediately assume that roulette's a downward trajectory,
Mhm.
because if you were to take, say, the casinos in Europe, if you go to a casino in England or in some other places in Europe, you'll see more roulette wheels than any other game. That's will
Mhm.
shock Americans if they've never been over there. And a lot of these cases, they're electronic roulette wheels. What they're doing is they're taking a camera and they're showing a real live dealer in a roulette spinning a ball, and then the casino the screens are located all over the casino, and
Right.
you can essentially be in another room and you're watching a live spin, but it's not right in front of you. It's on a camera, so it's legitimate. It's not a tape, or it's not fixed or anything. And so you'll have, in many cases, hundreds of, not just the people at the table, but hundreds of people gambling on the spin of a ball. And this is kind of genius, by the way, what the Brits and English casinos did with roulette, because that was already a game very ingrained in European gambling culture. And
Mhm.
so they basically modernized that, decreased the labor cost, because you don't have to have, say you want to accommodate 150 roulette players, that might have taken 10 dealers, actually 20 dealers, because you need somebody to stack and somebody to spin. You know what I mean? It's hard.
Right.
You have usually two people at a roulette table. So now instead of 20 people, you could have two people, and then you can just basically have the cameras, and you can have 150 people betting on it. So this is a very interesting dynamic that's going to go counter probably to what we would expect here with regard to roulette. Like, who goes and plays roulette, right? I can't think of the last friend I had that ever said, "Hey, I'm going to go play roulette tonight." Nobody. But maybe I'm wrong. And by the way, I don't know what you experience. I don't even know if you have a roulette where you have worked.
Mm.
What's your thought on roulette, Matt?
I mean, again, yeah, I can't really speak to it specifically. It's not allowed in most places outside of Las Vegas and Atlantic City.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's again just the way that the laws are written. Like they allow card games, but they don't allow games with dice or games with a spinning ball. So craps and roulette are usually not allowed except in some Native American casinos, but certainly not in any card rooms across the country. You kind of you stole my thunder a little bit there. That was a great answer, but no, I mean what you described is every casino executive's wet dream, right? I mean, why should you have 20 dealers dealing at 20 different tables? You're paying each of them minimum wage. They're making the thing you didn't mention is that they're each making tips, and the tips are money that the house isn't getting, right? So, if you have a player that loses $500 over gradually, like they get ground down over the course of the night and they lose $500, but they tip the dealer $100 along the way, the casino never saw that $100. So in a perfect cost cutting world, casinos don't want dealers, they don't want tips, they don't want they would basically want exactly what you described. One roulette dealer dealing at one roulette table with everybody sitting all over the place watching that table, one blackjack table where everybody can, get their own hand dealt to them and decide what they want to do with their hand, but you're all playing against the same one dealer's hand. That's probably the future. And then there are these baccarat pits, right? Where did I see one? At the Palace Station. I don't know when was the last time you were there, but the Palace Station basically
Yeah,
decided,
last week, but I didn't see what you were describing here. Go ahead.
they have like a baccarat theater almost, which I saw when I was pitching my baccarat game there, where basically everybody is sitting in front of their own terminal, and one dealer is dealing out the baccarat hand, and people are sitting almost in like stadium like seating, but at a much smaller scale, maybe like 20 people or so, all betting on the same hand. And so it only requires one dealer and you've got 20 different people playing. I mean, that is almost certainly the future of in-person gambling. And it's just a question of how long it will take to get there. Going back to something you said before, because it's just too interesting to skip over. I know we have limited time and whatnot, but
Well, let's run over. Let's go into overtime because
all right.
I know we talked about, hey, we'll do an hour. Hey, listen, we're going to go as long as we want here, as long as I'm having a good time, and hopefully the listeners are too. So, and I've got a few more questions to ask you as well. So please continue, Matt.
Right on. Thank you. Going back to the thing about, I completely sympathize with your rant about the people making decisions in a lot of casinos, never played a hand of cards, never touched a dice, etc. I would argue that they are equally necessary along with the people that have been in the casino world. And I think both of them are needed if you're going to have a good final outcome, right? I think what you used to have in Las Vegas was just like the Wild West. And the thing was, every place was making money because it's almost impossible not to make money with a casino, right? If you have a legal casino and your name is not Donald Trump, you're going to make money off of it, right? And then it's just a question of how much. And that's the thing where it's like they were happy with what they were making. And so it was okay. And a lot of them were not corporate owned, right? They were, family owned or mob owned or things like that. And they understood the give and take. And they were like, okay, we don't need to fleece the customers because we don't need to make every last dollar. We're doing well and we don't want to rock the boat. So let's give back a little bit and etc. What I think of, I'm sure you've seen the movie Casino, and maybe you remember at the end of Casino, Robert De Niro sort of complains like we don't see him in person, just his voiceover, complaining about the state of casinos. And this was in the early 90s, right? He was complaining that like now you're going to come in with a suitcase of cash and some kid is going to want your social security number. And it's like, on the one hand, yeah, that affects our sensibilities as a gambler. On the other hand, well, what the fuck? If a guy's coming in there with a suitcase of cash, it's probably money laundering. So I don't blame the powers that be for wanting that guy's social security number. So, I see both sides of it. And I think both sides of it are necessary. I think it's unavoidable that now you're not going to walk into a casino with a suitcase full of cash and not get asked any questions, because the casino is going to be liable for, whatever that guy does for not having taken a greater interest. Like, gone are the days when you could just turn a blind eye to somebody like Jimmy Chagra, who I'm sure you remember the name, like the drug dealer that used to play in the poker games in the 70s and 80s. And the reason I thought of him is because he was like Tony Spilotro's arch enemy, the guy that Joe Pesci plays in Casino. Like, these two guys were at each other's throats, but in both cases, they both gambled in casinos, and nobody was going to dare lift a finger against them, because these guys are gangsters and they're going to come in with enormous amounts of cash. And if you're the casino, why are you going to say anything? They're going to lose their money to you. Just give them whatever they want, leave them alone, whatever. Those days are gone. You can't do that anymore. There's just too much red tape, too many, legal
Regulations and all that. Sure. Yeah.
way too many regulations. So, but those regulations at the same time make some sense to me. Just probably they go a little overboard. So the same thing with the bean counters, I'm just using that term to mean anybody that's making decisions in a casino that is not, more intimately involved with casino life. The bean counters, I think, are necessary to sort of keep the casino people in line. Where it's like, no, you can't just give away the farm, even though that's a nice thing to do, even though we do want people to leave with a smile on their face. We want them to leave with a smile on their face, but we have to get something in return. And then, so there's a balance, is what I'm saying. And right now, the balance is, it used to be back in the 70s and 80s, too much in the favor of casino people. And now it's too much in the favor of corporate people. And if it's ever going to meet a good balance, it has to come back a little bit from, the power needs to be taken away a little bit from the corporations and put a little bit more in the hands of the casino managers and the people who are more intimately involved with the gambling aspect of it. That may never happen because, like you said, the gambling portion of their income has gone down so much and will probably continue to go down. If it's 25% now, I don't see a situation where it reverses and then suddenly, casinos, 40% of their revenue is going to come from gambling. It's probably only going to go down, which means the thing that you're describing of gamblers leaving the craps table with a smile on their face, we're probably just going to remember wistfully the days when that was the case. I don't think we're going to return to that because there's no incentive to. And
All
so it
right.
is what it is. Yeah.
It is what it is. Note to self. Bring, note to self. Bring up this topic again as a separate topic for a future show.
Nice.
Because it's good. That's a good one, and a lot of people have opinions on this. So let's file that one away down the road. I think that's really
Sure.
a fun topic, and I could go back and forth, and I think you're right about balance. So let's move on. And man, the next one is one you are just so uniquely qualified to discuss.
I'm
And I'd
ready.
like you to take your personal bias out of this because you are personally biased. You don't get to
Mhm.
market your own products, but we're going to talk about other casino games or other table games. And what I
Sure.
mean by this is people know craps, they know blackjack, they know roulette. And then a few years ago, well, more like 30 years ago or so, a new game, popular game kind of burst on the scene. It was called Caribbean Stud Poker, and then Pai Gow and some other games that people that may not really know what I'm referring to. But now you walk into casinos and there are all kinds of games we haven't even heard of, don't even know how to play. And you're somebody who's actually marketed and invented games and tried to introduce them to major corporations. So you have unique experience here. Now, obviously, I'm setting you up because you wouldn't have gotten involved in this if you didn't in your heart believe that, hey, these games have a chance of becoming popular and maybe getting a very wealthy from this. So I completely understand your enthusiasm, but in a general sense, talking about the what are called the other games, the category of other table games, direction of the arrow up or down.
So again, I need to give a take a step back for a second.
Sure.
Part of the reason I looked into a table game is because, for example, in California, other than in Native American casinos, you can't have slot machines, right? You can't have slot machines in card rooms. So, and let's be honest, if you could, we would eliminate at least 3/4 of our table games, if not all of them. Like if I owned a casino and I was just cold-blooded, wanted to make a profit, if I was allowed to just have slot machines and nothing else, that's exactly what I would have. So table games are more the novelty, more to keep a certain crowd happy. But if you've got a limited gaming space, you would fill it with slot machines. It's not even a tough decision. So again, I was marketing a table game from the perspective of I was going to market it in California mostly because that's what they need because they don't have slots. If I tried to market it in Las Vegas, it would have been dead on arrival. Just because there's really no incentive for places to try new games. So again, saying that I'm taking a step back, out of the major games, you mentioned blackjack, you mentioned craps, you mentioned roulette. I think Baccarat deserves a place among the base casino games, right? I think those are the big four. But are you okay with me going that direction?
I guess so. But I don't know if that, again, the question is, will they be the big four, 15 years from now? I don't know.
And so here's the thing. I think out of those four, I think Baccarat stands the best chance of having an upward trend. I'm not saying it will, but I think it stands the best chance. First of all, it's one dealer per table, so you eliminate craps right away because it's too much manpower. And you possibly eliminate roulette because, like you said, you need one person to deal and sometimes one person to muck the chips on a busy table. Baccarat's just one dealer. The hands go super fast, right? For those who don't know Baccarat, because it used to have this air of mystery around it, right? It used to be like only James Bond and high rollers played it. And then about 20 years ago, Easy Baccarat, well, actually 25 years ago now, Easy Baccarat was invented, which basically was, as its name suggested, like, well, we're just going to make the game easy. We want to market it to everybody. Like, Baccarat shouldn't just be for the high rollers. And so Baccarat found a place in the main pit. And you go to a place like the Gold Coast, for example, and there's 18 Baccarat tables in the pit, and which is more than the rest of the tables combined. It is so fast to deal out a Baccarat hand. It takes at most 10 seconds to deal the hand and a minute to settle the bets, and then you're ready for the next hand. It's a super easy game to learn. It seems complicated at first. As soon as you learn the rules, you're like, oh, is it this easy? Yes, it's easier than blackjack. It's easier than craps by a long shot. So as far as card games goes, super easy. It appeals to Asians, which I'm not picking races or anything. It's just a fact that more Asians pour their money into Baccarat than other table games because it's got a place in Asian culture. Because 9, your goal is to make 9, and that's sort of a lucky thing in the culture. The numbers 8 and 9 are lucky. So it fulfills all the requirements of being a game that stands a chance. And what's come out a lot is variations of Baccarat games. You haven't seen variations to craps or to roulette. You've seen a couple of variations to blackjack, such as, blackjack switch and double exposure and things like that, but not a whole lot of variations. Baccarat, you've seen quite a handful of them because people realize that could be the future of table games. So I just wanted to get that out there, that Baccarat, more than the other 3 games, probably has the best chance of surviving. Now, getting to what are called the carnival games, like Let It Ride and Caribbean Stud, and Flush Attack. Just from a personal standpoint, I thought Flush Attack was a surprisingly simple and creative carnival game where basically you just get dealt 7 cards and you're trying to get as many suited cards as possible. And sadly, that's like the trend, is like the simpler you can make the game with the potential for a long shot payout, and it can be dealt out quickly, then boom, you've satisfied all three parameters of what you need for a successful table game in this day and age, right? You need it has to go quickly. You have to have long shot payouts, and it has to be easy to learn. So I thought that satisfied all of them pretty well. Let It Ride, easy to learn, long shot payouts. It takes a long time, and you're not getting a lot of money out of it as the house, because the minimum bet is usually $5, and it just takes too long each hand. Same with Caribbean Stud. The minimum bet is $5 usually, and as the house, you're not getting enough out of it. I mean, if you look at the bottom line for the games like that, they're a fraction of every other game we talked about. The total hold by the house. So if it comes down to the bean counters, I don't think those games stand much of a future. The only thing that might pull a house to keep one game of each is if there's really a demand for it. If people go in saying, oh, Let It Ride is my game, and so they're not going to go to a casino that doesn't have at least one table of Let It Ride, that might be enough incentive for them to keep one table of it. But I don't see a future where a casino has more than one table of any of the games we just mentioned. Let It Ride, Caribbean Stud, Flush Attack, you name it. There's like Asia Poker. I can't even keep track of all the ones on the market these days. There's a lot of them. You go to G2E, you'll see all of them in one place at the same time. And just every casino doesn't have the room for all of them, right? You just don't.
Oh yeah, every time you walk into a casino, I see a new game I've never heard of before. You're right.
Because they have to rotate, because they have to keep trying something new, because you just can't have one table of everything. You don't have the room for that. So, Let It Ride and Caribbean Stud are two of the forerunners of carnival games. And so they'll probably always have a place. And then everybody else is basically just competing for table scraps. Pardon the pun.
Yeah. All right. So you can take the next group of games together or separate, and that would be slots and video poker. They probably should be taken separately, but I'll let you um, answer. Again, upward trajectory of the arrow for slots and video poker.
If you're taking them separately, I would say upward for slots and downward for video poker. Just for a real quick explanation, I mean, the bean counters of video poker realize that why do we have a machine that only holds 99.5% when we can have one that holds 98%? So they're going to lower the payouts on the video poker, which in turn is going to attract less video poker players. So I think video poker is going to become less and less popular as time goes on. Slot machines are kind of weird because, I mean, you don't have a sign that says how much they return. And I don't know if you ever read the book What Happens in Vegas, which is basically about the management side of Las Vegas. And it's a fascinating read, and I do recommend it. And one of the things they pointed out is that certain casinos used to advertise over a bank of slot machines, like 99% return on this bank of slots.
Yeah.
And they did not get any more play than any other bank of slot machines, which makes no intuitive sense, right? You figure if you're going to play slots and you see a bank of machines that's advertising 99% payback, and you have another bank of machines with an unknown payback that's certainly less than 99%, wouldn't you gravitate towards the 99% one? That doesn't happen in reality. In reality, people are sitting down at slot machines. It's like a leap of faith. They don't know what the household is. And if they ever knew, they'd probably be horrified, because in some cases it's 94, 95% payback, which means, literally you pull $100, it's keeping $5 every time. And you can go through $100 very fast, at a slot machine, much faster than at a table. So, that there's no reason to advertise it. There's no reason to lower your hold if you're the casino management. People are going to keep playing it. And I think that's been shown. I know we're trying to leave coronavirus out of this, but slot machines have withstood coronavirus better than everything else because, okay, you play at every other machine instead of every machine. And you have the slot attendants become like dedicated to wiping down the machines as soon as somebody gets up. Slot machines have held up pretty well in terms of the revenue they've generated. I mean, just from the initial numbers that I've seen, of course, there's a drop off from pre-coronavirus, but the revenue from table games is almost non-existent, and the revenue from slot machines has fallen off a commiserate to the way that the number of people walking through the door has fallen off. But per machine, it's stayed relatively the same because a given slot machine is in use a pretty decent amount of the time. Like slot machines are not sitting empty these days. So, again, except for the ones that are dedicated to being left empty for social distancing purposes. But if a machine is available for play, it's seeing play. So, slot machines are probably here to stay for as long as brick and mortar casinos are here to stay. We can talk about whether brick and mortar casinos are eventually going to be phased out, but as long as they're here, slot machines are going to have the lion's share of the gambling revenue. I'll use the word gambling.
Fascinating response. Thank you, Matt. That's quite good. In fact, this is one case where I'm very disappointed. I don't have more time to follow up with more discussion on slots and video poker. I actually have more questions, but for those listening, I know you probably have some questions too, and we've got to get into a follow-up show on just that because that's a lot of questions there, especially about video poker. I'm going to skip on down poker. This is something you and I have some background in, a little bit of background. We'll try to keep this to a couple of minutes, but the future of poker, this could be online and it could also be live. What do you think?
Another downward trajectory. I mean, this is, and again, I'm like, I still feel like the pessimist to everything. But all right, here, let me throw some optimism out there. Okay, the one sustaining thing about poker that I don't think will ever go away is the proliferation of small buy-in online tournaments that you could never have had in brick and mortar casinos because there's no it wouldn't make sense for the bottom line. But if you're running an online poker room, you can run an $11 multi-table tournament and you can attract 3,000 people and you're keeping $1 from everybody. You just made $3,000 running a multi-table tournament.
Yeah, and the winner's got his or her eyes on winning $12,000 for their $11 investment or whatever first prize is, right? Yeah.
Right. There's gold at the end of the rainbow, right? You're not playing to win $50 here. And, I said $11. I mean, they get smaller than that. Like there's tournaments with $5 buy-ins, $1, $2, even less than that. There's free rolls, there's any bankroll tournament you can play online. So I think for not the hardcore gambler, but for the recreational poker player, I think online poker is here to stay. And I think that's going to be one of the lasting legacies of online poker is that people can play with, $100 bankroll can last you as long as you want it to last online. Whereas you sit down in a brick and mortar card room with $100, it could be gone in an hour. And that's no exaggeration. I mean, it could easily be gone in an hour. So that I see as a plus. Just about everything else related to poker, I would say is down. Even before coronavirus, casinos were phasing out poker rooms, understandably, because you could put something else in the same space and it would generate more revenue. Places used to have poker rooms because there was a demand for it during the poker boom. It was like, well, we have to have a poker room because, what if people are coming and they want to play poker and they're not going to stay here? No, that's fewer and fewer people. Now it's like if people are coming to Las Vegas, for example, because they want to play poker, they know the rooms to go to that have, the best poker action. And so they'll probably go there anyway. Like they're not going to I'm just throwing one out there. They're not going to the Flamingo Hilton, for its poker action, right? They're not going to Harrah's Las Vegas for its poker action. They probably have a token 2 or 3 or 4 tables, but
Yeah,
you're going to
Harris
get
just
those guys.
closed theirs a few weeks ago, by the way. But go
Oh,
ahead.
well,
So it kind of
case in point.
makes
There you go.
kind of makes your point for you.
And I did not know that, but I'm not surprised in the least. And so probably there'll be more to come, and especially when you consider the social distancing aspect, and who knows how long that's going to last. There's just no reason to be promoting in-person poker anymore. Now, going to card rooms in California, a place like the Commerce Casino, which has 180 poker tables. It's like, well, they have to have some poker, but you know, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they'll eliminate a sizable chunk of their poker tables and convert them to other table games, like blackjack and baccarat and things like that. Because if you can only have so many people at a table, you might as well have those games. What poker is not, it's not as popular as it was, and then combined with coronavirus is just going to make it worse. Online poker, oh God, I mean, for any serious player, it's become, it's sad. I mean, speaking as one of the first people to play online, literally one of the first, and you might be in that same crowd that played on Planet Poker and Paradise Poker, and then which evolved into Poker Stars and Party Poker. Those were the glory days of online poker. I mean, you know, just I salivate just at the thought of it. Like, it was just so cool to play back then, and the games were so
Yeah.
large.
Note to self: file this away for another future show. Go ahead.
All right, so I won't get too deep into that, but basically, the games were easy. It was easy to get money on and off the site. Now it's the polar opposite, where the very best players in the world are playing online and grinding out a living. And they're playing across multiple tables, so there's really no avoiding them. And to play for any serious money, you have to butt heads with literally some of the best players in the world. And you can't do it. I mean, anybody that is playing recreationally is either playing at stakes low enough that they're avoiding the best players, or they're getting ground down. Their bankroll is going to slowly get whittled away at the higher limits, or else you are one of the best players in the world. That's it. Those are your options. But if you're a recreational player, you have to stick to low limits online, or else the competition's too good. And then your in-person card rooms, the competition's a little looser, but it's nothing like it was in the mid 2000s, right, when poker was at its peak and you could print money at the poker table. It was fantastic. I was a poker prop from 2001 to 2009, and those were good times. That's all I'll say. But would I want to do that now? If I had no other choice, I would do that, but that would not be something I would look to do now the way I did 20 years ago.
Tough way to make an easy living, as they say.
Yes.
So excellent. Well, really good on poker, and we'll again file that one away for another discussion in the future. This one, the last one really on my list. I have another question after this, but let's discuss the last one. I'm going to discuss what I call the sub heading of this category, which is horse racing. Now, sports betting, you're going to talk about in a moment, Matt. I'm going to talk about horse racing very briefly here to give you a breather. And that's that horse racing it's kind of a sport, people would consider it. And if you go into a sports book in any casino, particularly in Las Vegas, and I guess Atlantic City now too, says it's legal there, almost half of the room or half of the seats are taken up by horse players, horse racing bettors. And they'll have their own little TVs, and there's these rows, and it's kind of looks like looks like the Library of Congress or something, where they have this. I mean that it's these little cubby holes and papers all over the place. It looks like a library, and they're studying racing forums, and in many cases, these mostly older men. It's almost entirely men. It's almost entirely older men over the age of 65. who sit there in the middle of the day. Post time is usually at 1 o'clock on the East Coast. So say 10 a.m. all the way till 7, 8 at night. These men come in to these sports books and they sit there day after day after day. And this is a real culture in Las Vegas in sports books. Now, we've seen horse racing decline steadily. There's a lot of reasons for that because largely competition, just other sports, other gambling games, casinos, sports gambling, all this stuff. And then it takes a lot of time to invest in horse racing, to be a handicapper, that is. And then on top of that, you have the hold or the takeout of horse racing being in some cases 20, 22, 25% even in some cases. So, is this even beatable anymore? And some people would argue no, or it's certainly very difficult. So again, you're just squeezing the small as the pool of gamblers gets smaller and smaller, they're squeezed tighter and tighter. And so every time I go into a sports book, which is used to be every day, but it seems like you just see a few less people, and some of them are just frankly, it's not nice to say this, they're dying out.
Mhm.
It's an old crowd, and you're not going to see, you don't see young people sitting there. You
Right.
don't see people middle aged sitting there. You don't see people with real jobs sitting there. This, in my view, has no future. None.
Mhm.
I would
Right.
think in 15, 20 years, this will be, there may be a few casinos that have, oh, that's the place where the horse players hang out. Yeah, there'll be a couple of places in town where you'll still have that. Certainly in Florida, you would see this,
Mhm.
where that has a lot of retirees. Maybe Florida may be a little different because of its, unique demographics with seniors. But most places, horse racing as a component of sports gambling is on a steep decline. I wouldn't want to be investing in that sector at all. Now, I've given you my pessimism on
Yeah.
horse racing. I'm going to give you the much broader, perhaps an optimistic view if you want, or maybe not. Sports betting overall. What do you think, Matt?
Well, I hope you don't mind if maybe I'm going to throw this question back to you because without getting too personal, I think whatever gambling you do is mostly sports betting. I would say, right? I mean,
Almost entirely now. Yeah.
exactly. So I would say you're and being in Las Vegas, you're a lot more familiar with the sports book scene and with the sports betting industry in general. This was a question I had for you. Even as somebody that lives in Las Vegas, do you have any reason to go into a physical sports book anymore? Or can pretty much everything be done on now? I don't know the legalization of the places like what FanDuel and what's the other one? DraftKings.
DraftKings. Yeah.
Right. I mean, they've become sports books, which I think people saw that coming. I know they're not legal everywhere. Are they legal in Nevada?
No, no, but they're legal in largely New Jersey and I think Pennsylvania, maybe a few other
Right.
states. They basically have made partnership agreements with land-based casinos
Mhm.
they're basically outsourced. So like whatever the casino is, maybe doesn't want to hire a bunch of people, so they'll outsource it to the DraftKings people. Or in
Got
many,
it.
it was William Hill, by the way. That was another what you call independent operator. Now William Hill was just bought out by Caesars, which is terrible situation for
Yeah, by
sports
bankrupt
gamblers.
Caesars. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, strangely enough.
Yeah.
And so you have a consolidation happening in sports gambling now, which I guess getting into the answer, I was there more I could discuss that, or why don't
But
you go ahead and finish and I'll incorporate that into my answer.
no, that's no. I guess my right. No, my question was, since you have so many online options, and I'm not even sure what all of them are, um, what reason really is there to go into a sports book anymore? I mean, if you're a 20 something or a 30 something, you're used to being in front of a computer. You're used to going to an online sports book and, getting everything you need from there. So the only argument I could think of is like if you strictly want to deal in cash and then you want to go to a sports book because you want
Yeah,
to make your bets in cash and get it back in cash, but that's a dying breed as well.
yeah.
So you personally, do you have any reason to go into a sports book? Do you see a future in sports books?
Again, I'll try to keep it short because it's such a broad
Mhm.
perspective I have on this. I have to say, when I first moved to Las Vegas in 2002, every single day, and I don't say this is not bragging, by the way, it's really pathetic actually if you think about it. But
Wow.
every single day I would spend 8 or 10 hours in a sports book. I mean, I'm talking about 7 days a week. I
Wow.
mean, I would go in, and the games start here in the west time zone. They started usually at 4 o'clock, and I'd be there till midnight. It's like a job,
Mhm.
and so I'd physically sit there and watch the games, watch my action, make halftime bets, and of course, I think what you're getting at now is because in Las Vegas and in Nevada and in a lot of states now, you can bet offshore. I'm sorry, you can bet online. Excuse me, I misspoke. You can bet online legally here in Nevada. And then, of course, back then, I also used to bet offshore. What
Mhm.
that meant was I had essentially bookies, or I had accounts offshore, usually in Costa Rica, other places where you'd have money deposit offshore, and I would make wagers through an online. By the way, there were hundreds of thousands of Americans, so-called. It was supposed to be illegal, but it was so it was just like everybody looked the other way. It was just kind of like given that
Mhm.
people did this. So
Right.
that was a convenience thing for me, was to bet online. And then of course, if you could bet online also, you could line shop very easily. So if I'm, say,
Right.
sitting physically in a casino, it's very difficult to get in my car and have to move to another casino. I probably don't have time because the line might be better somewhere else,
Mhm.
particularly like halftime lines, things that are what are called very time sensitive. Like, for example, I'm betting a halftime on a game, and the line is 2 here, and then it's 3 somewhere else. Well, I may want to, if I could get that 3. Well, the great thing about having an online account, or multiple online accounts, is being able to grab the 3 where you can find it, or the 2.5, or whatever, the maybe reduced juice. Instead of it being minus 110, maybe it's minus 105. Hey, you're saving $5 there. I mean, that adds up. Believe me, if you're making dozens of bets, or in some cases hundreds of bets a week like I used to, I mean, that little $5 you save here and there, man, it adds up. In fact, that
Absolutely.
can be the difference between being a winning gambler, and I'm not making this up. That could be the difference between breaking even and making a little bit, or this and that. So I can't stress how important it is to have what are called outs. That was the old
Mhm.
sports gamblers term, is to have outs. You want to have outs. You want to be able to put your action somewhere. And so when the online started here in Nevada, legally, I mean, now I had offshores, of course, credit lines also, which helped. You didn't have to deposit, so just like bookie situation,
Mhm.
And but here in Nevada, I would go to like five. I think I had 5 or 6 accounts. So I go put whatever my deposit would be in the M Casino, and then one at South Point, and then one at the Las Vegas Hilton. That's the Westgate now, and then one at MGM, and then one at Stations. And usually these places would have bonuses as well. So if you sign up for a new account,
Right.
they give you a free $100 or $50. So again, that was not insignificant either. So you do what's called, this is a rude term, but it's called bonus whoring. You try to get the bonus, basically, and you're looking for every conceivable advantage, especially as a sports gambler. So I was doing that and juggling myself for a lot of years, and especially when I was doing this very, very heavy. And then recently, and now let's again take COVID out of it, because
Mhm.
that's a game changer. But let's say, just in the sense of recently, why would I enter a sports book today? Why would I want to be in a sports book when I have, right now, I'm sitting here, I have 2 computers in front of me. I have 3 television sets in my office.
Mhm.
And they have, on Sundays, they're going to be full of ball games. I'll have statistics on, I mean, you have everything at your fingertips. Why would I ever want to leave this environment? And I really don't want to. But here's the advantages of actually being in a sports book, because when you're looking up at, and for those of you listening to my voice, you have to think in the biggest terms. Think of when you went into the Westgate or the Las Vegas Hilton, and you looked at this gigantic panoramic screen, and there would be, I don't know the number, but let's say 40 or 50 ball games going at the same time, and you'd see the lights and all these games and action, and people cheering. And after a while, the excitement of that wears off. I mean, you get completely immune to
Mhm.
that being like a stimulant. I get excited, don't get me wrong, but I don't go there for the enjoyment of that. A lot of people do, And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I love that. I think it's wonderful that people make a bet, they sit in the sports book, they cheer for their action. Hey, that's great. That's I've done that too with my friends. So I don't want to say anything disparaging about that. But if I'm there, let's say alone, or I'm there seriously to make money, why would I sit there? Well, here's why. Because I even with my computers in front of me or my TV screens or what have you, I can't watch on a Saturday. I cannot watch 65 games at once. It's impossible. So, but you know what? If there's something that happens in a game, or I hear some cheering, or something catches my attention on that television screen that's 7 windows down, but you see hey, what's happening in that Iowa State game, and you've got to feel, hey, what's going on, and the halftime's getting ready to come up, and the starting quarterback just went out, or you catch things in person, or let's say you look at the flag. I've done this before. I've looked at the flagpole as they're playing the national anthem, and the flag is extended, and like the wind's blowing so hard it's going to blow the flag off the pole. But this doesn't come through on a computer unless you're checking the weather reports. This is I did this before, the Rice Buffalo game. And there's like 45-mile-an-hour winds, and the total was 75 or something.
Right.
Man, you just run to the window and you bet you see what I'm saying? These are little things that, well, how often you catch one of those? Well, not that often, but I'll tell you what, you catch one of those a week and you pull out $500 and hit it, you're making a living in some cases. If you're hustling and looking for opportunities like that, well, that's why now I don't have time to go spend 8 hours a day in a sports book anymore. I just, I've got too many things in my life. I'm married, and if you have family, you understand all those issues.
Mhm.
But for somebody that's just that wants to focus on what they're doing, there is something about that insular atmosphere where you almost develop a sixth sense: sight, sound, taste, smell, you touch. You've almost got the sixth sense of being aware of some other thing, like that Iowa State game, and you saw the quarterback go down, that you wouldn't have got that, or the flagpole, looking at the flag and running to bet the total. Those little items, in many cases, you could do all the handicapping in the world, but sometimes it's just a dumb. You stumble across a golden nugget laying in the road and you pick it up. It's just simple as that. And I must say that you don't get that mostly online. So again, that's a long-winded answer to your question about why anyone would stay. I should say why any serious gambler would stay in a sports book. But that's kind of my mantra.
No, that was a great answer, and I could feel myself being in the sports book with you while you were
Yeah,
describing
yeah,
that. So that was fun.
yeah,
I mean, I guess what I would say is like you described the Westgate sports book, which is I think the mecca of sports books, right? I
yeah.
mean, it's so you've got that, and you've got maybe a couple of others that are really top of the line. Dozens of TVs trying to appeal to you, and then you've got the much smaller ones, which you feel like are there just to satisfy the requirement of having one, and those are the ones that were more likely to sublet to William Hill, for example, right?
Right,
Like
right.
so, maybe those two or three mega sports books survive, and probably the lesser ones not as likely, right? Because
No,
that
no,
there's
I'd say
something there.
I think they all survive. Again, they're low
Yeah.
cost.
Okay.
And again, people are betting sports. Again, I think this gets into a larger question, and we'll kind of segue that direction. Then I'll kind of throw one last one at you. So
Mhm.
I'll kind of set this up by saying, I think again, here's what people want. When I say people, I mean the demographic that's say replacing us. And when I say us, I mean we're middle aged or whatever.
Mhm.
And how are people? What are the gambling habits of people in their 20s and 30s? What do they want? Well, they're gamers. Right, they're gamers.
Mhm.
They play video games. They've been raised on that. They've been raised on Madden football, so they like this kind of what I call interactive experience.
Mhm.
Sports gambling immediately gives you that. And in-game wagering, which is a term we have not used yet,
Mhm.
that is just absolutely. I don't like to use drug references, but it's really a crack kind of a situation, because so what, you miss the kickoff, who cares, because it doesn't matter if the game just kicked off, you can still get in on the action.
Right.
Or the Kansas City Chiefs are playing the Raiders tomorrow. Oh, the Raiders went up 7-0. Well, now the game is a pick 'em, or whatever. Now the game, instead of being -10, it's Kansas City -3. Maybe you want to bet the Chiefs now. So you're constantly reevaluating every play.
Mhm.
Every play, you're reevaluating your possibilities. And a lot of gamblers that do this really with a lot more skill than I do, because I don't have the time to invest like I used to be able to do it, and I miss a lot of opportunities, and I make a lot of mistakes still. But the people that I think are really very successful now at sports gambling are not handicapping the Kansas City Las Vegas Raiders game, which is again is tomorrow. They're not spending a ton of time on that. They're going to wait for situations to come up in-game betting. And
Right.
these are actuaries, these are people who knows numbers, probabilities, understand the rosters, understand that when a tight end goes down for the Carolina Panthers, how does that translate into an advantage? If
Right.
they're carrying the tight end for the Panthers off on a stretcher, what does that mean? I mean, they're going to know. I don't really know. I don't follow that team, but some people, a lot of people have, you know, they have files of information on these kinds of things, and they make their adjustments, and they're very good at it. So that I think is, I've given you kind of this a broad thing about oh, that's what the professionals do, but I think what the professionals do is somewhat of a precursor of what the public will do. And I'll give you an example, like with fantasy sports, and that burst upon the scene around what, 10 years ago or so, maybe a little longer, maybe 15 years ago. All of a sudden there were
Mhm.
fantasy sports for money, by the way. I mean, for money, big
Right.
money. People can make, $1 million or certainly thousands of dollars playing, betting on their fantasy roster or certain players scoring number of points and this kind of thing. So that created I mean, there are millions of people that are doing that. And so now the NFL's ratings are going up because everyone's now watching that Carolina Jacksonville game that nobody gave a shit about. Now they're watching it because they have action
Right.
on not only action on the game, but maybe a fantasy player or two to watch. So
Right.
it creates what I call the key word here in sports gambling. The key word is interactive. It is an interactive experience. Your destiny is the same as the destiny of that tight end who catches the touchdown pass. So for me, I mean, for me and my perception of where sports gambling and all gambling is going, I think it gets down to interactive. The gamers, they want to feel like they're in control of that stick where they move the dragon and they shoot down the planes or whatever they're doing in their video game. They want to be in control. They don't want just to sit back passively and watch cherries come up on a roulette wheel. I understand that that's kind of like old style gambling, and that's a very passive thing. You really have no control. Video poker, there's the illusion of control, as you well know. You hit the buttons, you discard cards, then you get a redealt, a second round of cards. I guess there's some illusion of control there, but of course that's not really true. That's a myth. But there is certainly, when you're moving the stick around in gaming, or you're betting on the tight end or football teams, you are in really total control of your destiny in the sense of making your choices. So I think that particularly for people that I think, and we are an educated population, you don't look around and see that sometimes, but I mean, we are, in other words, book smart. I think a lot of people are very educated. They understand that if you put work into things, and all this information is online now. I'm not talking about sports gambling. You can get lines, point spreads, player updates. People are talking about it. There are forums about it. It creates a whole different subculture of enthusiasm. And I think sports gambling, for that reason, has a very bright future. And I think any game that ties itself to what I call that interactive experience will also have a very bright future. Those that don't have a very poor future.
That very well said. To be clear, I agree that sports betting has a very bright future. My question is whether brick and mortar sports betting has a bright future, or is everything going to be done online? Um, and maybe there's room for both. But certainly, the lack of available sports books in California is not stopping people from betting on games, right? I mean, people are getting their money down one way or another.
Yeah, I think,
So,
I'm sorry, Matt, I have to interrupt you because I do want to say that uh, I believe me, I learn new lessons about these questions and that very question every day. Like,
mhm,
without any experience, I would have kind of thought maybe the same way. But what happened let's look very quickly on what happened in New Jersey when legalized sports gambling became a thing about
mhm,
3 years ago.
right.
So again, keep in mind the culture of Atlantic City. Casinos since 1978, I believe.
Mhm,
Poker wasn't legalized until 1994, 93, excuse me. And then sports gambling wasn't legalized until I think 2017.
Right.
So, and again, you've had online poker in that state for 8 or 9 years. You've had online gambling in that state for 8 or 9 years. So if you lived in New Jersey, you could always log on and gamble. I mean, you
Right.
could in the last decade or so. But why would people then drive to Atlantic City? Who in their right mind would live in um, anywhere in the state and drive 2 hours down the New Jersey Turnpike and go make a bet? Well,
We used to
first,
do it all the time.
we used to. Yes, we
Yeah.
did. A lot of it's the camaraderie. A
Yep.
lot of it's just like you want to be around this thing, and you want to hang out and whatever. So I think that you said there's not that much future in brick and mortar. I think if you multiply the New Jersey experience again, you mentioned that Las Vegas is very different as a resort destination, but there's a lot of, I call them Atlantic cities. In other words, there's a lot of New Jerseys around where people in Ohio or people in Pennsylvania or people in increasingly states legalize sports gambling. That's all Mississippi. Again,
Mhm.
it's a very conservative state, but it's got sports gambling. So, the person in Mississippi is going to want to drive to Biloxi or Gulfport or Tunica, and they want to lay some coin down on the Tennessee Titans or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they want to hang out with their friends. So I don't think that brick and mortar sports gambling is at all, at least there's no indications to me that it's on a downward trajectory.
Fair enough. And once you pointed out, I realized like how many of my friends, yourself included, like I met from the gambling world, right? Like if there was no brick and mortar gambling in my 20s, I wouldn't have met just about any of the people that are still in my life 20 years later. So it's kind of an interesting perspective that, yeah, people, it's not just enough to bet on a game, but you want to be, with the people, with the, not just with your friends, but also with gamblers, right? Like-minded people that have the same mentality about the game. They're not just there because they're Cowboys fans. They're there because they're fans of money, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
Yeah.
we're all looking for an advantage or an edge or an experience. That's for sure. Well, I'm going to wrap this up, at least on my end, and I'll give you the last word to either ask a question and or make any comments. But let me just give you. I actually had a number of other topics, but I'm going to throw them out at you, and you can take anything you want here, Matt, regarding what I call, again, our topic is, and I think still is, how gambling games are changing, how they've changed, how they're changing, and where they're going. So again, keep in mind what our topic is. But you can discuss any or all of these things that I'll throw it at you that we just unfortunately have to race through. But I did want to get them out because they're interesting. But
Mhm.
how the aging gambling population, if that's a factor, like if you look at slot machines and things, it's
Mhm.
mostly older people. We already talked about horse racing, how that matters. Online, we talked about how different the online experience is. Also, and this is, I've never been politically correct, and neither are you, and I don't really care
Mhm.
if people don't like the way I phrase this. I just don't care. If you don't like it, turn off the show. Asians tend to be more part of the culture. And
Mhm.
that's a big thing, especially in Western states. And if you go into certain casinos, you see a large um, uh, percentage of Asian gamblers. Well, what's the future of that? Now, you've actually I wanted to really ask you about that because you have firsthand experience with that market. And Asia will be a increasingly important part of the global everything anyway, and that's
Right.
certainly going to be in the case with gambling and casinos, and Macau taking over Las Vegas in terms of the biggest, at least in terms of profitability, the biggest casino market in the world. I mean, that says everything, right? And then just any regional differences you wanted to discuss. In other words, we've largely talked about the United States, but gamblers are gamblers, and people that want action, they want action. So if there are any differences about any other cultures or nations and their habits. So I've given you a very large, what I call this buffet to take at the very end. Any thoughts on any of those?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've really enjoyed this discussion,
Yeah.
and I hope we can continue this topic another time. Like you said, maybe we'll try to get some questions from people, and let some other people take us in the direction they want to go, and just talk more about gambling in general. Um, the the Asian discussion, that's just out of the scope. We don't have the time for that now. I mean, the short answer is that I don't think there's anything offensive about what you said. I mean, it gambling is more a part of Asian cultures than it is a lot of other cultures. That's just a fact. That's not being said in a positive or negative way. It just is. So a lot of future decisions or decisions about the future of gambling have to be made with that in mind. Um, you talked about old people. I mean, it, I think a lot of forms of gambling are just going to be phased out over time naturally, right? I mean, you still have some bingo halls in Las Vegas because that was somehow the stereotypical thing. Like when you get old, you go play bingo. I don't think anybody from our generation or younger is going to go play
Right,
bingo when they retire.
right.
So that's going to be phased out. And the same thing with people sitting in front of slot machines. Like you and I are not going to be sitting in front of slot machines. And I don't think our generation is likely to do that either. I could be wrong, but I think that's more stereotypical for the people that are senior citizens now. And for 20 years from now, the gambling industry is going to have to figure out what its future is if it's not slot machines, if it's not table games, because there will be people that retire that have, disposable money that might want to gamble, but sitting in front of a slot machine is not going to interest them, nor is sitting at, a blackjack table necessarily. So, and that's what G2E is all about, just right, trying to find the next big thing. And maybe we haven't even seen it yet, but I think, like you said, the sports betting. I'm glad you took the lead on that aspect of the conversation because I think all the different aspects of sports betting and fantasy sports are definitely a large component of the future. Where maybe the people that sit in front of slot machines now will be sitting in front of sporting events 20, 30 years from now
Yeah.
because that's where their gambling money is going to go. And just one final note, I don't want you to sell yourself short either. I mean, when you talk about knowledgeable sports bettors, I understand you're not spending quite as much time now as you were when you were at your peak, but you have a wealth of sports betting knowledge, and you've been kind enough to share it with me and a lot of other people. And you are definitely one of the experts in the field. And we could create a whole show about that. Just talking about what you've learned about sports betting over the past 20 years. So that's all. I just wanted to say, please don't sell yourself
Well,
short.
thank you.
Like people
If
that
we
know
make it
you,
if we
yeah.
make the show about my mistakes, it may be a 24-hour show.
You and me both. I mean, come on. Right? Didn't you just you just posted a thread? What was your biggest mistake? And people,
Oh, everybody had a good time with that. That was fantastic.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this is my biggest mistake, but if you want me to keep going, I got 20 more I can share with you. So
And every gambler who's serious has done all those things or similar
absolutely.
things. But I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
I'll hold you to that. That maybe
Yeah.
before the Super Bowl. Let's hope we get to the Super Bowl. But we'll do
Yeah,
maybe a show on just football stories or bad beats, or we'll do something along. We'll do something fun. That sounds. This has been fun, but we'll do something more fun. Okay.
absolutely.
All right. So, well,
Okay.
Matt, I think that's pretty much it. Any other closing thoughts? I appreciate your kind words, and I'm really impressed with your knowledge here on games that I don't know nearly as much about as you do. So, thank you for sharing that. Any final thoughts?
No, I hope this has been enjoyable for people to listen to. And like I said, if people have questions, I think this would be a good conversation. But because again, I think we both have a solid knowledge base in the gambling world, and a good portion of our friends and acquaintances do as well. But maybe some people are listening to this that aren't quite as acquainted with the gambling world. And if you have questions or whatever, share them on the video. And I think this would be a good thing to follow up, with a future discussion. And we both know that we could talk for hours and hours about all different aspects of gambling. So it's not like you're twisting our arm, to get us to talk about it. So, I'll just put that invitation out there. And otherwise, other than that, I'm just looking forward to talking to you next week. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure indeed. Matt Lester, thank you for joining me. I'm Nolan Dalla, and this is our fifth edition of An Intelligent Conversation. Matt and I were kind of reluctant to discuss this when we thought, how are we going to talk about gambling games for an hour? And here we are 2 hours later, still rambling. So I'll cut it off now. And thank you for listening. If you're listening, it means a lot to us that you've given us your time. And please share a comment or two or email us. And we're not sure what we're going to talk about next week, but we'll be here and we'll certainly make it interesting on An Intelligent Conversation. See you next time. Thanks.